Already, J.D. Vance's VP rollout has been marred by disaster, from his unearthed comments about Donald Trump to his efforts to scrub his intention to end abortion from his website. But one set of past remarks has proven really challenging for the embattled VP nominee to overcome. He said back in 2021, if you look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it? And look, I know that it may be difficult to figure out whether the attacks against J.D. Vance are fueled by partisanship or whether he's just that terrible. But when I saw this introduction to an interview with J.D. Vance himself on Fox News of all places, well, it kind of put my doubts to rest.
When that interview surfaced, two things leapt to my mind. Those of us who talk for a living make mistakes. We say things that in hindsight we might phrase differently or better or not at all. And then I thought about a stormy day at Reagan National Airport where I met two women desperately trying to get home to South America. When we parted ways, they said they'd like to pray for me as their way of saying thanks for the day spent together. They're Catholic nuns, childless, dedicated to God, love this country, living lives of service to others. And it's not just Catholic nuns. Some of the finest people I know don't have children. Teachers and guidance counselors and lawyers and doctors, and they love other people's children enough to teach and guide and protect and minister to them. Some people choose not to have children. Others desperately want them, but they can't. In a moment, we'll speak with Senator J.D. Vance. We have never met before, but we have many friends in common who tell me that he is smart and he is talented and he is more than capable. None is perfect, no, not one. That's what the good book says. And the American people are forgiving if we ask.
To be clear, again, this was an introduction on Fox News. If even the Fox hosts are doing real-time damage control and qualifying J.D. Vance's remarks on a network that was perfectly content to lie for Republicans to the tune of $787 million, then I think it's pretty clear that Trump is saddled with a pretty big J.D. Vance problem. And of course, Vance is now desperately trying to walk back what he said. He claimed in the same interview with Gowdy that in fact he's not at fault in his own unambiguous words, but rather that it's the left who's at fault. Here's what he said.
If you look at what the left has done, they have radically taken this out of context and, in fact, aggressively lied about what I've said. What I do think is true, Trey, and this goes to the heart of what I was talking about 3 years ago in those comments, but it's going to be something I continue to talk about, is that the left has increasingly become explicitly anti-child and anti-family.
So by suggesting that anyone without children couldn't possibly be capable of any commitment to the future, Vance was merely advocating for family values, which makes total sense because, after all, Republicans are the party of family values. That's why they blocked a bill protecting IVF, which for roughly 2% of all Americans is the only way to have children and start a family. That's why they killed the child tax credit, which was responsible for slashing the child poverty rate in this country. That's why states like Republican-led Arkansas are relaxing child labor laws. That's why Republicans vote against child care, against early education, against universal pre-K, against SNAP, where about half the recipients are children, against Medicaid, where again, roughly half the recipients are children, and it must be why they've all lined up to breathlessly support an adjudicated sexual predator who was just found guilty of 34 criminal counts related to hiding an alleged affair he had while his wife was at home with their infant son. Because, as J.D. Vance seems to imply, Democrats are anti-child and anti-family, unlike those Republicans who are the image of morality, decency, and most importantly, love for family. Of course, those obvious points aside, things have actually managed to get worse for Vance, not better, as this narrative continued to plague him. Pete Buttigieg just appeared on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and was asked about this statement, considering he was one of those childless heathens who have no stake in our future that Vance warned about.
He doesn't just say that being a parent gives you, an important role as a citizen, which I agree with, or that it gives you unique perspective on the future. It's that not being a parent makes you less. Like
I think that's absolutely how they feel.
He said, people who don't have children, this is a quote, have no physical commitment to the future of this country.
Wow.
And I just think about how, no physical commitment to the future. Like, when I was deployed to Afghanistan, I didn't have kids back then.
Right.
But I will tell you, especially when there was a rocket attack going on, my commitment to this country felt pretty physical.
The problem here is that Vance and Republicans seem to have decided that they, and only they, are entitled to have a say. These people preach freedom while seeking to strip freedoms away from anyone who doesn't look like them, pray like them, talk like them, or live like them. And because they've decided that their way of life, a heteronormative Christian nuclear family that goes to church on Sundays and prays at the altar of ExxonMobil the other 6 days of the week, could quite possibly be the only way to live, they've effectively waged war on the rest of the country. But far from convincing everyone, all they've done is show just how out of touch, how intolerant, how bigoted and extreme and dangerous they really are. And that point is so obvious that even Vance's cleanup efforts are being mocked on air.
So, Jen, efforts to clean that up have failed to this point, to put it mildly. And I think the fact this became a thing on Fox News last night shows this has broken through. This is a real thing that Trump fans now have to deal with.
Vance just keeps digging deeper and deeper into this hole, and it's the kind. I mean, look at Trey's own response to it, to talk about, what's he conveying to us in that, in what he said. I mean, first of all, it's a very moving thing about what he said about the nuns, but it also suggests to me he does not think this is a winning ticket, right? When a Fox anchor is going out of their way to distance themselves from the running mate, it does not suggest to me that they think that this is a winning message.
Which might explain the barrage of reporting suggesting that Republicans are already souring on J.D. Vance. But I want to be clear, J.D. Vance is not the problem, he's just a symptom. Any issues that Republicans have with Vance are a question of style. The real problem is his dangerous extremist views, and that's not isolated to Vance. It is a rot that has pervaded the entirety of the GOP. Vance's inability to campaign only serves to highlight a deeper problem in his party, and that is that they are too extreme, too controlling, too dangerous, and too anti-democracy to lead. They have lost the plot, and the American people are finally taking notice. Vance may be taking the heat, but the blame lies with everyone pushing the exact same agenda that he is. Before you go, to see more content from MSNBC, make sure to subscribe to this channel by clicking the link right here on this screen. And you can also follow the link to see some exclusive content only on TikTok.